Thank you all for caring. Thanks for your questions. I'm going to stay for a little bit of the panel, poking away in the back before I have to run out to make a couple calls. But look forward to spending more time with all of you in the future too.
Awesome. And I actually, so I'm Laura Foote. I'm the Executive Director of YIMBY Action. Thank you to Spur for letting us use their beautiful space. They are a wonderful urban think tank that we partner with a lot. And we partner with a lot in advocacy and transit advocacy. We hand over to them. We're the housing focused people. And I'm going to mix up the order of things, actually, if our panelists don't mind being a little nimble, because I totally agree that that last question teed us up really well for Peter's got a presentation on helping people understand that housing is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. That these visualizations of what does a whole community look like. When you build housing, many people have we call a scarcity mindset. They start talking about the strain that housing is going to put on our infrastructure, the burden that those new people will have on our existing infrastructure, and what does that mean for small businesses? And, Peter from MIT has a really incredible mapping tool that helps people really understand how neighborhoods can change and what that means in a holistic and positive way when we build housing. Peter, do you want to go for it? And I think, is this one on too?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm Peter Hirshberg, and I'm with City Science SF. It is an affiliate of the MIT Media Lab. The Media Lab has 10 city science centers around the world, but none in the US, except for the home office in Cambridge. We're bringing one here to exactly address those questions. Ned brought up two things. How do you bring people along? How do you bring citizens who wonder, what does this map mean for me along? And then secondly, are we just doing housing? Are we doing integrated planning? Okay, so that's the concept behind City Science San Francisco. And this is actually over at MIT where we're beginning to build all this stuff. And then we're going to build a center here in the city to kind of flesh it out. Okay, the first thing we want to build is actually a mechanism. So as we go through getting ready for family zoning, people have a sense for what would it look like. So here is kind of a prototype of the system. The bottom is where you see various zoning things, you understand its impact, and the top is you might visualize it. This is being built so that citizens can understand it, so that advocates like ourselves can work on it, and so that policymakers like this guy can understand what policy changes should I put political capital on to get more housing and make a more flourishing city. In doing all of this, we wanted to pick a neighborhood. So here's the family zoning map. It's terrific. And you'd be excused if you wondered, what does that mean for me? At the Planning Commission, they had the same questions. One of the commissioners said, excuse me, we have 3D tools, we have models, we have games. Why can't you show us our future like that? And another commissioner said, did you even listen to us? So that's the reason that a model that can interpret these things is great. We decided to start with a particular neighborhood. We picked the Inner Richmond because you want to do community engagement with the community. This is a neighborhood that has 2 supervisor districts, Chan and Sherrill. It's got 2 commercial corridors and a transit-oriented corridor. Okay, great. So you get this zoning map and you're wondering, okay, are these all going to be 105-foot buildings? We picked the 2 corridors, and then the question is, what might get built? The first thing you have to do once you have all of these parcels is you have to take out the parcels you're not allowed to build. Even though there's a map that shows their zone, these turn out to be multifamily housing. We're not going to tear down an apartment building or perhaps a hospital. So they actually are these, the Kaiser facility up here, People's Multifamily Hospital. So we have to take those off the table because we're not going to develop those. Also, there are a number of buildings that are very narrow. That's a charming thing about older cities. We have Victorians, we have narrow buildings, but you can't build high on a narrow building because you need to have two stairways and such. So unless you aggregate all those little ones together into a big parcel, they're not going to get developed anytime quick. So this is an example of what you see in that neighborhood. So once you do that, you then find, oh, these are the actual parcels we can work with. This is what might get developed when you go out to the neighborhood. And they have various heights associated with them. What might it look like? And this is an example of those. These are commercial properties or kind of empty properties, and you can see some of those here. Here's an example. Here's Clement Street. Clement Street might change. So what we wanted to do is say, what might it look like in the future? So using various AI and design techniques, we've added the height to it in kind of a pencil sketch. And then we've picked an architectural style, because what we really want to do is make a movie where you can go down your block over the next 10, 20 years and see what it might look like. And then we could have a big policy conversation about how long it would take to actually build that stuff. But you want to start seeing what things look like. Here's another example. This is on Geary Street. That happens to be an O'Reilly Auto Parts place next to some smaller buildings. And then we started kind of deciding, what if we did some conceptual thinking about that? And you can see that there can be a taller one here. You can't do too much with the shorter buildings because they're too narrow. Here's another example in that same structure. We call this kind of impressionistic animation. The part of this is in the community engagement process, people tell us what amenities they want, and you want that to drive a little bit of what the developer is going to build. And then we started thinking, okay, if we're going to add something that'd be 3 stories more, here's one design language. It's the Victorian design language. But in fact, using this technology, you can apply kind of any kind of design language to it and see what you might get if you're to do that. And the reason we're doing this is, absent tools like this, you get people making maps like this that said, I read the zoning map. It's all going to look like a giant 20-story Walmart or the vehicle assembly building at Cape Kennedy. Okay, so given all of that, the next question is, what does that mean? Well, here's the fascinating thing. Under family zoning, if we just took those units that we know we can develop, not the narrow ones or the apartment buildings, you'd get about 1,700 new dwellings. There's already about 9,800 dwellings there. So 1,700 dwellings is a nice start, but it actually doesn't get us to our goal. Here's something fascinating. When you start running this through the system, we could make some policy changes. So remember, we can't develop the narrow buildings. That's because we have to have 2 stairways. But in Europe, they actually have a lot of single stairway buildings. It's new building materials, but the fire department has to get comfortable with it. You'd love to be able to develop here. And if we were able to do that, you could start imagining taller buildings that still had an elevator that picked up a San Francisco design look. Here's an example of what it might look like. Here's the fascinating thing. If you were to develop those properties, you'd get 2,700 new dwellings. So more dwellings could come from taking the narrow buildings and making them a little bit taller than taking the wider buildings and making them a lot taller. It's the reason that Paris is around 9 stories, is very dense, and you don't have to be like New York or Singaporely tall to pull that off. There are other policy things. Everyone's talking about permitting reform, and the Turner Center has done some economic analysis, and they've figured out that if you take 2 months off of permitting time, you could get about 15% more buildings, because it's just carrying cost gets better. So that's about 500 new dwellings. So the point is, this goes on and on. There's a lot of partial products, but something like this is designed to speed up agreement and to also kind of answer questions. I'll just finish up by saying the other question that often comes up is this going to overload our neighborhood? Is this going to overload the schools or the transport? So we did a mobility test where we looked at all the cars coming in and out. It's about 60% cars in that neighborhood, 22% walking, about 10% public transit. Now let's add in the new residents under family zoning. And if these new residents become younger, their families, they're going to work, what you end up finding is public transit goes up to about 31%, which means because they're using it more resources will be available for that. And I'll just wrap up by pointing out, if you start doing some of the economics behind this, you might see that even if the neighborhood goes up by 15%, the number of kids might go up faster because it's family zoning. That actually creates resources for school at a faster rate than general population growth. And likewise for tax revenues, because you have Prop 13 turnover and you've got buildings that are valued more on a higher basis. So you end up with, to Laura's point, actually more resources for these things. The plan on this is to take what we started and build a rich, interactive model that kind of the whole city can participate in. This is something that we've done at MIT that makes it interactive. This is an example of one in Boston. They wanted to put in a bus rapid transit system in an African-American area. So first you start citywide and people are collaborating. Where might the buses go? What does that mean? Who might get picked up? Then we come right down to the neighborhood and you see where it comes through. And then finally, we're going to go down to the street and people can start collaborating on what would their street look like in the future. And this is what our model can do there. By the way, if we'd done this in Valencia Street with the bicycles, we might have avoided a couple times of ripping it up and getting it wrong. This is kind of what's possible under that. So this is why we're bringing a City Science Center to San Francisco. We imagine an interactive place where not only we have a great tool like this, but it's also a place to bring all the development talent in this city. We've got people working on things like computational law for the future of permitting. We've got collective intelligence to get people to agree on stuff, all the building technologies. By bringing this together in an incubator, we have the opportunity, I think, to move things forward, and that's why we're thrilled to work with you.
I love it. And I think I want to pick on Isaac next, because this is where we're seeing, so they did a lot of development in Oakland. And now that development is not picking up, I think it's a good example in practice of this kind of, a lot of people fear that new housing, again, this is the first, we had the visualization of new housing brings resources into a neighborhood. Isaac is really doing that in practice. And what does it mean right now? Building a whole neighborhood around the housing that they brought to the neighborhood in Oakland. Isaac, take it away.
Better with the mic? Oh, better for. Yeah, no, it was interesting to hear about, this is really fascinating. I wish this technology existed a long time ago when I did a regression analysis for my planning thesis in 2007, where I had to comb listings manually. So that wasn't as easy. But yeah, to your point, Laura, you know, surprised we're not in a development cycle right now. I'm not going to be the developer that comes up here and complains about that. I think what I've been working on in downtown Oakland is what happens after you've overcome all the objections, the fears, and you've built all this housing. How do you stitch it into the community around it? And how do you use that as a way to reconvey the value that new housing builds to a community? And so downtown Oakland had a lot of development in the last cycle. I think they got a lot of things right, which I can talk about during our conversation. But specifically, the project I'm working on is a placemaking exercise, and we're calling it Northlake. And what we're doing is we've identified that in the last cycle, 2,500 new units, about 10 new buildings were built all around each other next to a business district. And so that kind of happened quietly in COVID. They all got delivered. A lot of things haven't gone right for those developers, but what was left is a 24/7 mixed use community that largely has been, the last mile hasn't been completed. Those ground floor retail spaces where people thought scary new programmatic large format retail was going to come and invade on their space, or the residents that came in were going to displace their community. They're there now. They live there. They go to the restaurants. And in a time when downtown Oakland and other parts of urban areas in around the country aren't flourishing the way that they have, what I've done with our company, along with another development group called Hall and Partner Group, who've built several projects in the area, we are investing private capital to essentially complete that last mile. So basically invest in placemaking, invest in blight abatement, invest down to the granular level of how can we help the city repaint light poles, put new signs in, and then kind of a centerpiece of that is creating an activation area. So you guys, for those of you that are in San Francisco and maybe don't spend as much time across the bay, there are examples of this happening in downtown San Francisco. We're trying to do this in an area that I think has a really great mixed use fabric. And the idea behind this is when the development cycle picks back up and we can show what private capital can do to nurture a neighborhood, a new neighborhood, maybe we can overcome some of the objections that come up.
I'm going to pray for you, but I'm not just going to pray for yeah. Not just going to pray for you. I'm going to use Hamlet to help me analyze what's happening at the city council. So this is like our next presenter. I love Hamlet because I have struggled for many years to figure out what our government is doing at obscure planning commission hearings where decisions about whether we're going to adopt single stair reform or not, whether we're going to get that planning discussion. I'm going to do personal story time. When we first got started, YIMBY Action, we were all on a Google group and a big text thread. And so one person would be sitting there watching what was happening on SF.gov TV and then would be texting the rest of us so that we could lie to our boss and tell them that we were getting a coffee and run over to City Hall in order to give in-person public comment. And as we head into this next phase of tracking and understanding, that there's so many people who don't, I mean, to talk about having the privilege to be able to run over to City Hall and give public comment, it didn't feel like a privilege at the time. But it really is something that you have to be highly engaged, you have to be highly networked, and you have to be highly knowledgeable. And Hamlet is breaking down those barriers, partially through using AI to help people understand what their government is doing. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Sunil. Yeah, you got to come up to the presenter. Yeah.
Are you locked or unlocked? And there we go. Awesome. By the way, I insist, please, everybody sit down. There's like plenty of chairs over here. It's sort of like there's one side of the room over here. There's all these chairs over here. It's just, it's a visual thing. Anyway, yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the people. And if we're going to have the political will to build in America, it's going to come down to some planning commissioner in some obscure city. And it always comes down to the people. And that's why we started Hamlet a couple of years back. So I've started a few companies before this, but the reason I started Hamlet, I actually ran for city council in Orinda, California, which is a BART ride away, about 20 minutes away. And I started attending city council and planning commission meetings about the housing element and sitting through 4 and 6 hour meetings. And, you know, nobody shows up to these meetings. It's usually the same 1 or 2 people. And they have similar things to say every single time. So I'm curious, how many of you actually attend city council meetings on a regular basis or planning commission meetings on a regular basis? Okay, this is like a very activated audience. That didn't work as well as I was expecting, but next time. Okay, so most people don't. And so your decisions are being made by people who are appointed or who are quote unquote volunteers, but have their own interests in mind, whether it's running for another higher office, et cetera. So I wanted to take these, you know, sentiments and turn them into data that we can actually use to figure out how, you know, how people are voting and whether what they're saying in public is different from what they're actually voting on, whether it's inconsistent. And so what we started doing was we started taking videos from public meetings for, you know, since the start of COVID. So the thing that happened was every city hall put recording equipment in when COVID started. So you have, you know, a huge body of history, you know, of how people voted and how they voted on housing and other subjects. So the combination of that plus AI makes it possible to build Hamlet today, whereas it wasn't possible years ago. So what we do is in Irvine, California, for example, anytime there's a new planning commission meeting video, we're ingesting that data and turning it into data about projects. And so if you want to know about this 5-point project, we'll be able to tell you straight from the video through a data pipeline that we built, the address of the project, the applicant, a description of the project, number of units, acreage, but we are tracking how people vote on projects so that we can eventually, you can imagine over time, build a very interesting data set about how planning commissioners and city councilors are voting and how friendly cities are towards specific types of projects and whether that's changed over time. From there, you know, where we're headed next is agenda tracking. So we're able to tell you in advance if you want to activate, you know, in the case of YIMBY Action, a set of people around a specific project. We're able to tell you based on a tag of an agenda. In this case, it's multifamily housing as the tag, whether an agenda item is coming up about something that you care about, and so that you'll know whether to show up to that meeting. But long run, you can tell where this is very much headed. We are building search on top of the videos. So if you want to dig deep and know what commissioners have said over time about a specific subject, we'll pull their quotes and you'll know what people have said. Of course, live demo takes a little bit longer than usual, but here we are in the Santa Barbara Planning Commission looking at quotes from planning commissioners about zoning. And if you want to go to the exact point in the video where a quote was made, we can do that.
I'm getting that right. Okay, so my question for, I think zoning or whatever.
So you can, sorry. There it is. Okay. So yeah, so what Hamlet wants to do is turn this information that's been somewhat opaque for many, many years and turn it into data. And ultimately it comes down to the people. If these politicians don't vote for the stuff, you can have all the data you want. And there's a lot of good data out there between what MIT is doing, what Acres is doing, et cetera, but we got to get the people to change their ways. Thank you.
And our next, understanding what people are doing, Acres tracks, land purchases and understanding. I mean, I think this is something that the pro-housing movement has not gotten super aggressive on, but is very excited about tools to help developers understand where the market is going next. I'll just turn it right over to you.
I'm Carter. I'm the founder of Acres. I'm just going to hop right in and share our tool with you as well. So we, similarly to Hamlet, are interested in transparency. And in our case, the idea here is very simple, putting things on a map so we can see them and understand and visualize what is happening. So I've gone ahead and pre-selected a few layers in here. We have thousands of these where we go build pipelines. We pull information from federal government, state, county, municipalities. We put it all in one place. So in one centralized place, you can go and visualize and understand really what's happening in an area. So I've zoomed in here to San Francisco, so we can turn on and look at zoning maps as an example. We can go and investigate and go dive into each of those at an individual level. We can overlay other things as well, right? We were discussing earthquakes earlier from the USGS. Generally speaking, if the data exists in the world, in a map format, we can bring it in here and allow you to see it. So in this case, like this is landslide hazards. So despite what you may want to argue for or against in a given neighborhood, it may not matter if there's a landslide hazard right there. And so as we gather more and more information about places in the US, and as I'll hop in here, I'll zoom in as you can see, we really get a lot of in-depth information from the assessor. So we can start to build these profiles of every parcel in the United States, about 150 million parcels that we have data on. So we can then go look at who owns this, what else do they own, and build profiles of owners of property around the United States. And where this gets interesting, and I'm really here to just create more problems rather than solve them for this room in particular today, is I'm going to zoom out and show you across the United States, what we do is we'll take that information and aggregate it. So we go and unmask corporations. So I'll give you the examples here are Lennar and other big home builders, several of which is names you've heard, some you may not. This is the top 100 home builders in the United States. These are the people that build houses. And what we're doing is monitoring everywhere they buy land. So we're getting a really good amount of visibility looking forward 2, 3, 5 years to understand where the corridors of growth are happening in the United States. And this is all actual data with real dollars being spent. We can show you the comparable sales analysis if we want to go dive into Dallas and see, just the tremendous amount of development and growth that's happening in that market. Or come over here into this crazy place, Florida, and see in some places even where it's being overdeveloped. And I'll pull up a legend so we can see this. So these different home builders here and where they're buying land, where they're planning to go put new housing. Some of that very high quality, some of that entry-level affordable or much more affordable housing. Charlotte, right, just crazy amounts of growth. And again, this is both at the outskirts of town as well as plenty of infill development happening as well within those markets. You know where I'm going next and you know what the story is next, right? So we'll go to Sacramento and there's actually like a little bit of action north of town. Come over here. And you notice those red dots, they're just not really anywhere. It's because, again, this is the top 100 companies that build houses in the United States, and they're just not even here. And when we go turn on layers for REITs or multifamily development, same idea. There's just prevalence all throughout the United States. And here we are incredibly sparse, save for like a few sections. I think this is KB Home. Yeah. A few sections of new housing being built. So I am only piling on the problem here. There's plenty of other folks with great solutions. We as a business are just intensely interested in transparency. So we're all having an educated conversation around what's happening on the land here in the United States.
And I'm gonna let you guys fight over the mic, so you're gonna have to pay attention to one another and like signal. So I'm gonna ask. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, so a lot of this is about tools to help us understand our city, what's happening right now, help us understand what's possible, help us understand, what our government is currently doing. And I'm curious, I mean, the efforts that have been made around transparency, I think historically have had very mixed results. They've been things that are very activating to the loudest people, and I would include myself among those. But I see a lot of these tools that are adding transparency, hoping to bring new voices into the conversation. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I'm curious how you guys are thinking about, you're bringing your visions and trying to engage people in what could our city be, what could our government look like. How do you feel like that's going as far as appealing to those broader audiences? Yeah.
First of all, our necks hurt a little bit here, but I'm glad to be facing you now. So in our case, we have a free version of the tool we give away. So we have very large companies that use our tool, and then individuals, about 500,000 people have downloaded the Acres app or use our website to go be able to gather information around their local area and what's going on.
I actually think that you would have something very interesting to contribute here. I mean, you're deeply involved in Oakland mayoral politics. I think it'd be pretty interesting if you talked about it, but.
I'm seeing my response here. No, more than mayoral politics, I suppose, a whole range of things in my second life. I just sense that all of this democratizes the process of developing, of zoning, of planning, and all the things that feel very opaque, right? To the point that you brought up. And I think that as we, cycles come and go, right? And I think we're not in one, we will be in one again. And I think as we kind of get to market orientation towards building again, I think these types of tools and available just not just to the public, but also to developers are hugely beneficial. I mean, I think about you have a lot of data, a lot of city council meetings in Oakland, and a lot of energy focused on, is housing good? What kind of housing should we have, et cetera. And so the idea of, at a push of a button or an easy search, being able to identify and put on record people in the city, because when they go on the stump, they'll say whatever politically, is expedient for them. And it's hard to hold them accountable to that. So I think that, as you think like your product, I think it's going, and I was talking to a former mayor of Oakland not too recently who's singing the praises of your product. And I think, I can't wait to start to use it, not just from a strict development lens when the cycle comes back, but also currently, right? As we're trying to, we're all pro growth. We sit, whether we want to or not, on some side of a political battle within a community. And so I think technology is super helpful. And I think these products that help us visualize what things can look like and don't make it look like monolithic blocks. And understanding just how development is happening around the country and drawing that contrast. I'm sure there's multiple applications that we talked about before. So this is all really exciting as someone that isn't sitting on the front row of all of this technology. And us real estate developers are famously anti-technology. We love our asymmetry of information, but this is net, this is a great thing to that will help in the future.
And I see Peter wanting to add something and Sunil as well.
Well, I
Yeah.
was gonna add, we live in a time when trust in government is low. And community engagement hearings traditionally have been, you've told the community something and they get to say something and they feel a little left out. And in fact, much of San Francisco is reacting to the trauma of urban redevelopment and what happened in the Western region, stuff like that. So this stuff is essential. The whole idea behind these tools is to engage populations in them. It's my hope that the kind of stuff that we're working on can eventually be taken to things like Roblox. So kids in middle school can get engaged and plan and understand that city. And people need a sense of agency. They need a sense that the city's being designed with them, not at them. And part of that is sharing with them the constraints. You have affordable housing advocates who say it all has to be affordable. But if you were to play the economics of that, that might not work. And then you've got developers who might do something that will leave other stuff out. So the idea that you can listen to constituents, even turn into agents, what their views are, and then play that out, that is a much more engaging form of things. And I think it fights some of the toxic form of social media where people yell at each other. Tools like this require us to get really precise about what these impacts are, what they might look like, how we can talk.
Yeah, I think we're in a moment where there's huge bipartisan support for building more. I mean, this is maybe the one issue we can all rally behind, which is to say it appeals to, you know, the traditional right-wing thinking of free market. We want like a free market for housing, but it also appeals to, you know, the traditional left's view of housing equity. And and so it is like one of the few issues that we can all get behind. And yet San Francisco is like such a city of contradictions, not unlike Orinda, right? Like we'll all say it in public. Oh yeah, you know what? Let's build more. And then you hold someone accountable and they won't do it. And so I think you can overcome those contradictions through basic logic and transparency. And so that's the challenge is everybody supports it, overcome the contradiction through logic.
So we've gone a little long, so I want to make sure people have a chance to ask questions. I think my questions are fine, but they're not as interesting as probably ones from the audience.
Second, traditionally, look, everybody can be developed as long as they want to capital. We had a historic anomaly for the last 15 years where interest rates ridiculously conservatively low, and anybody can do that now. Interest rates now are not historically high, but they're high in recent history. How long do you think it's going to take for development for the traditional business community a few long interest rates because we're building or is it strictly the labor and material costs that are combined shock and stores?
I think we got to forget that interest rates used to be 1%, so we can kind of get over ourselves. I'm going to bring up an example that worked. And I think that if you look at Oakland in the last cycle, coming out of the great financial crisis or great financial, I can't remember what they call it so long ago now. There wasn't a lot of development happening anywhere. And really there wasn't much happening in Oakland, certainly. And I think that you look at the policies that were put in place, not just on the zoning front, right? Like a lot of the focus, and we've talked about this, was on zoning, but what the city did afterwards, and I give former Mayor Libby Schaaf credit for this, was there's a last mile, right, for how you actually go from the right zoning to project development. And there was an emphasis on the city leaning into, promote development. They had impact fees that layered in over time. Right. And so to spur development when cost of capital was low, right? You already had the high density zoning, but they waived impact fees. And they said that we'll waive impact fees if you get your permits in by a certain date. It'll go and ladder up. And what that did, along with a lot of other things that were done, was it introduced certainty and predictability into a process. So when you think about the things that impact development, and certainly in the Bay Area, right? I mean, I don't want to pick on this too much, but there were 2 affordable housing projects that got awards for $1 million a unit. Right? There's something totally wrong if it takes $1 million to build an affordable housing unit. And I don't even think the affordable housing developer was happy about that. So I think we could go down the litany of things that could get improved, but I think the city's role and the municipality's role in spurring development is to focus on where they kind of get in the way, right? And a lot of that is in creating Byzantine, Ned was talking about kind of trying to create more efficient ways for cities to work together. I don't think you need to have incentives necessarily. You just need to make it work with in a way that's predictable. So when the development cycle does come back, people know exactly what the rules of the game are. And I think we got away from that from a policy standpoint and from a process standpoint over the last few years.
Can I add? I just want to add another, and I think then we'll take another question. But one thing I want to do to respond also is if you're looking at like the last 50 years also, right, taking that even longer time horizon, the entire industry of people who used to do, in San Francisco, we call them Richmond specials. You would tear down a single family home and build a 6 to 12 unit building. That entire industry of small project developers went away. They went into kitchen remodels or they closed up shops and was not replaced by small to medium-sized project developers. And so part of the next phase, I think that I 100% agree with the professional developers, the large projects are going to be paying attention to interest rates and predictability and all that stuff. The other people to be thinking about entering the market are people like my landlord, the Hom family, which is like one matriarch. She has 4 semi-competent kids who sort of they kind of manage the property and they also own a parking lot. And like the idea of these people building a building is a little ridiculous, but they used to, right? That type of person used to be capable of hiring someone to build a, 10 unit little building, and then they would level up their landlording business. And like, there's so much making the process something that somebody who maybe is ESL, maybe doesn't want to hire 5 permit expediters, wants to be able to do things. The level of predictability that person needs to build a 2 unit building, to build a 10 unit building is not yet being comprehended. I think when you look at our Department of Building Inspection, when you look at our planning department, yes, they are doing a lot of streamlining. Yes, they've made a huge amount of improvements, and we can't undersell how much that's going to impact the larger buildings and, making that sort of like, 15 unit plus building that's requiring real hyper professionalization. But if you're talking about recreating a missing middle industry, we're going to have to go the next level of idiot proof and predictability. Okay, another question from the crowd.
So we heard from Ned at the beginning about the United CEO wanting more housing. And then we heard a lot about different ways that like information about the city and also what developers are doing is being democratized. So I'm wondering, how do we connect those? Like, are major employers, especially tech companies in the Bay Area, actually feeding back into these processes, like both with money, but also with public awareness, integrating data into their own decisions or products? And then like, I guess ultimately from the bottom up, how is it that, a few small homeowners are able to consistently show up and block things when there are all these trillion-dollar companies, down the road that would benefit greatly from housing being built?
So this is obviously YIMBY bait. Anybody else wanna?
Well, of course, the people who don't yet live there are the people who are generally left out of the conversation. So I'll just make this one point. Part of the game mechanic of a thing like the tool that we showed is if you bring a bunch of people together and you see the objective function is we have to get to more housing. Now let's look at all the policy decisions you make and how tall it will be. But if you make the game, you have to level up. And if you don't like that game, you can sit on the side. That's a little bit of how these things need to be designed so that their architecture is get to the future. I can't speak. I mean, there's a whole bunch of economic development issues about like what bigger companies should be doing to represent this, and that's the other half of Ned's job. But I can speak to like I think how you design these.
Yeah, on the data side of things, there's what I would describe as like a last mile data problem with local governments. So the tech companies are doing everything that they can, and we use, you know, some of the larger tech companies in our own data pipelines. But the reason a Hamlet can exist and other businesses like us is there are 19,000 incorporated cities in America, 3,000 counties, 80,000 special districts. I guarantee you none of them have a consistent website format, and none of them have a consistent way of doing minutes. None of them have a consistent way of doing agendas. And so, you know, for us, we're trying to turn that into a common structure. And that's not something that's worth like OpenAI or Perplexity's time, because, you know, how many people are searching for what happened in a 2017 Calabasas City Council meeting? So it is going to be to some extent on companies like us to fill that last mile problem. And I guarantee you we are working on that sentiment problem. And, you know, that's something I'm deeply interested in right now.
I was just gonna add to that. I think that we treat every project like it's super special, and they're not snowflakes, right? They're just regular. I mean, most homes are the same. Most 5/2s are the same. And so we've got a level of regulation, and I don't think these are unintended consequences, right? One gets layered on another, it gets layered on another. And so all of a sudden you've made it oppressive from a timing standpoint, from a cost standpoint to do development. And I think, you know, what I'm excited about for Sunil's product as it evolves is you have a really a streamlined way to convey that, right? If you can go to multiple city councils and show that they're all saying the same thing and they're all taking months or years to get to the same answer, I think that's going to be very powerful to take this from something that becomes very like, you know, anecdotal of the same person showing up at a small town's meetings complaining about the same thing that's happening in a San Francisco. And so kind of over time, I think that there's an opportunity, especially in California, to reflect that we're building housing isn't really that. I mean, we have code, we have different regulations, but largely they're more similar than they are different. And so we treat them like every city has something that's super special, and it fosters a culture of no because or no but.
Yeah, I think the other term I've heard people call it is a vetocracy, where you don't get, nobody can say yes, but everybody can say no. And I think this is the only quibble I'll have is you call it unintended consequences. And I'm not sure I agree.
On camera, so
Right.
I'm just trying to make sure if this is, there'll be somewhere.
I think we can have the historic argument of how intended were these consequences later. We'll do last question, Zach.
Yeah, I'm curious about the funding and business model for getting this data out. I know I work with vehicle miles traveled data, and there's like a couple of companies that want a lot of money that they say their data is the best, but only a few people can buy it. And then there's like one company that's like, oh, well, we'll give you pretty good data and make it available to many people at a low price. So like, I assume some of you are going that latter direction, and how is that possible?
And the cost of data storage, the cost of data retrieval have both come down pretty dramatically just in the years since we've been in business. So quality of data, I'm assuming you're going to answer the same thing, but quality of data is paramount. The monetization method with which you take that to market can vary dramatically, but there are ultimately the pipelines you build and what you're putting in the data set for us is all that matters. Right? If it's not great, it's not reliable, no one's going to pay for it. It doesn't matter how much we charge. So we tend to be very intensely focused on getting data out. Now, the data models, the way that these 19,000 or 30,000 munis, depending on how you count it, store information in the first place. So sometimes like comically bad. I'll give you a great example. Fresno County here, it's a pretty large place. To get data from them, they mail us a CD-ROM. We have people, like we had to buy a CD, CDRW, it's the fancy stuff. We had to buy a CD reader. And we have people on staff who are like, what is this shiny thing? Tech work. So it really, it's really quite difficult to get all this stuff in one centralized place.
Yeah, for profit, We sell to real estate developers, national home builders, based on the number of cities or municipalities and governing bodies they subscribe to. We will expand out to other areas of, companies that interact with, local governments. And so, 2 trillion of our GDP runs through, some local government at some point. So you can imagine retail, construction, renewable energy, et cetera, all have to deal with planning commissions, city councils, et cetera. So we'll expand horizontally over time. And it shouldn't be down to a person blocking that. Since you told a juicy story, I won't name the city since we're being recorded, but one reason we came to the conclusion minutes are not reliable is we encountered a Bay Area city that a disgruntled city clerk deleted years worth of notes on their way out.
Oh.
So that's obviously not great. I won't say who. Yeah, I can't do it.
I'm glad you actually started out with the right copy. I'm just gonna go.
There are two things here. One is business model. The other is kind of like the policy to openness to make sure this stuff exists. So even in our city last week, the city wanted to kill the API to 311 because not that many people were using it. And yet I've thrown hackathons where that's the #1 used thing. And you need to make this stuff kind of open and public. Our model, because we're kind of an affiliate of an education institution, is to make this a public good. One of the reasons people aren't doing this is it's kind of difficult and not necessarily a great business. So we've invested so much in San Francisco in kind of all the work that Scott Wiener's done, the work that you're doing, our new government. This we see as a new form of digital infrastructure. So the things being kicked off to be supported by the same kind of people who brought you changes in government. I think as this gets rolled out to other cities, you start charging in some open source model for that. Also, some of the data is really easy to do. It's now very inexpensive to go shoot 360 pictures, 3D model, do transformations, that do architecture. But the telecom data, there are various vendors, and that can get expensive, particularly when to blend that with, say, Visa data to understand the economics and stuff. So that's the thing that has to get worked through. But the stuff exists, and we're just the city with the market power to go use it.
All right, so we're going to kind of end there. Thank you guys so much. I feel really optimistic. I feel like these, being able to, especially being able to see all of the multi-impact that housing can have on a community, and the way people can run with that opportunity. So thank you guys. I hope you guys all had a great time. And stick around to network, we're going to hang out.